It was the anti-war protests that took down the Vietnam War. In 1968, by the time Richard Nixon got into office, there was much protest about the war. Consequently, Nixon and Kissinger found themselves in a predicament. Who should they obey? The interests of the people or the interests of the corporations? Now, we have to remember that Richard Nixon was a product of the military industrial complex. He was Mr. Anti-Communist, and he was the vice president of the United States from 1952 to 1960. Now, you don't get into that position unless you're with the program and unless the power elite like you. And that means the money has to like you. Nixon was their boy, and he was expected to continue the war in Vietnam. But the problem was that we still lived in a country in which corporations had not fully put their death grip upon the Constitution. In other words, people and their votes still mattered. And the voters increasingly were saying that this war had to stop. Now, there was a real division in the country. It wasn't a fake division engineered by the media. It was a real division. The division was between the hawks and the older people who stood with corporate America, and the doves and younger people who wanted the war to end. And Nixon and Kissinger found themselves in the middle. They were between a rock and a hard place. Ultimately, Nixon sided with the doves and he shut down the war. That's not too surprising because Nixon, even though he was a product of the war machine, was a Quaker at heart, literally. He was raised as a Quaker and he remained a member of the church. Now, the powerful elite could see peace coming in 1971, and that's the real reason why Nixon was impeached and afterwards forced to resign. The Watergate break-in was a CIA operation. Almost all of the burglars were either CIA agents or CIA-friendly operatives, and they were E. Howard Hunt, CIA, James McCord, CIA, Frank Sturgis, soldier of fortune, CIA collaborator, Bernard Barker, soldier of fortune, CIA collaborator, Eugenio Martinez, CIA collaborator, if not CIA himself, and Virgilio Gonzalez, CIA collaborator. And their mission, whether they understood it or not, was not to get any secret information, but to intentionally botch up the operation to see if they could put Nixon in a predicament where he would make the wrong moves so as to be subsequently impeached. And ultimately, this is what happened. Now, there's no question that this is what happened. People friendly to the CIA and people not friendly to the CIA have long felt that James McCord intentionally botched the Watergate break-in. The end result was that Nixon was out, and a powerful message was again sent to any future president. Stick with the program of war, or this is what happens to you. There will be a Pax Americana. Regardless, it was the Vietnam War protests that brought the Vietnam War to a conclusion. What these protesters effectively did was bring discomfort to the ruling class. There were protests at Ivy League universities, and this was unsettling to the powerful elite who love their Ivy League institutions. The protesters embarrassed them and made them look like fools, and worse, war criminals. Anytime a political movement can bring personal discomfort to the ruling class, change will be effected. If the ruling class is not made to feel discomfort, no change will occur. Peaceful, nonviolent movements don't work. The ruling class is entirely willing to tolerate peaceful, nonviolent protests. Only when the ruling class is threatened economically or personally will they respond. When anger and occupation comes to their beloved institutions, they will respond with change. As an example, let us look at the Gandhi myth. It wasn't Gandhi who brought down the British Raj. It was Adolf Hitler. Adolf Hitler bankrupted the British Empire and forced the British to give up their overseas possessions. Absent Hitler, the British were wholly willing to let Gandhi engage in his nonviolent protests. The same goes for the United States. As long as protests are peaceful and nonviolent, the ruling elite in the United States are totally willing to tolerate these protests. It's when the protests turn violent that the ruling elite begin to respond. Well, those protests in the United States escalated, and by ending the Vietnam War, the protests put an end to the cash cow of war that Vietnam gifted to the ruling elite. And the ruling elite and their corporations took notice. After the Vietnam War ended, the ruling elite and their corporate heads got together and said, never again. We're never again going to allow protests to interfere with our war economy. And so they set in motion a series of measures to ensure that this would never happen again. Their first measure was to make sure that they controlled the media, lock, stock, and barrel. Within 15 years after the Vietnam War ended, you saw a mass consolidation of the mainstream media to the point where only a handful of corporations controlled the message that was coming out of the mainstream media. This era was when Clear Channel started. This was when bigger corporations like Time Warner and Viacom came into being. Instead of a diversified media, what we got was TASS. These corporations are still merging. Viacom no longer exists. Viacom merged with CBS to form Viacom CBS, then rebranded itself to Paramount Global, then acquired Skydance Media to become Paramount Skydance Corporation. The large players that dominate television, film, news, and streaming are the Walt Disney Company, Comcast, Warner Brothers, Discovery, Paramount Global, Skydance, Fox Corporation, and Netflix. Now, these firms maintain market control through vertical integration, owning both the content production studios and the distribution channels, networks, streaming platforms, cable systems. The difference between 2026 and 1966 is that there were more independent news outlets then than there are today. The mainstream media is now controlled by large corporations, which in turn are controlled by the ruling class. Now, the second measure that was implemented was to control the influencers in society. And the influencers after the Vietnam War were the celebrities. The corporate heads, they weren't going to have any more Jane Fondas or other celebrities coming out against any kind of war at all. Now, you can control these celebrities by controlling the venues and the forums in which celebrities depend upon for their income. It was important for corporations to control the publishing houses in music and literature, as well as the stadiums and event centers in which these celebrities performed. Therefore, if a celebrity didn't get with the program, their records deals could be canceled and their tours could be mysteriously shut down. Or they could be flat out excommunicated from mainstream media. This is what happened to the Dixie Chicks after they came out against the war in Iraq. They weren't with the program, so they were gone. Concomitant with this control of celebrities was the creation of a superstar culture in the United States. There were no superstars in America back in the 60s and early 70s. It was only after the Vietnam War that we started to hear about superstars in music and entertainment. The first superstar that I remember being mentioned was Cheryl Tiegs. I had never heard of a superstar before that. Corporate America wanted to be able to control the message that was coming out of the celebrity's mouth. So if you create a race of super people or demigods, you can not only make more money in ticket sales and merchandise, you can use those superstars to move the masses into the cattle pens of opinion that the ruling elite desires. Furthermore, the newly minted superstar is much more likely to be compliant with the ruling class's message because he or she is making a fantastic amount of money and doesn't want to jeopardize that fantasy lifestyle. It's a quirk of human nature that we desire a sense of immortality on this planet. We know we're going to die, and so we're all looking for something that transcends ourselves. And if we can attach ourselves to an immortal superstar, someone who will live forever because the media will ensure it, by buying a piece of that immortality, we too can become immortal, or so we think. Corporate America took advantage of that quirk to line its pockets. Ticket prices went up. Plus, corporate America created the concept of you purchasing a piece of that immortality through t-shirts, CDs, books, clothing, posters, and so many other items. Nobody in the 60s that I can recall walked around with a t-shirt with a celebrity's name on it. This changed as we moved into the 80s and beyond. In today's world, regular people pay a fortune to attend a Taylor Swift concert, then pay an even greater fortune to buy all the other crap that Taylor Swift and corporate America is selling. Americans and other people around the world are willing to pay this, but is it good for them to spend all their money on bling and entertainment? Taylor Swift is a compliant superstar. It's not surprising that she will parrot the message that corporate America pumps out. It's not surprising that she and other celebrities remain silent on important issues that might run contrary to what corporate America is selling. Yes, you have seen a few celebrities speak out against the various wars around the world. Good for them. But for the most part, it's the older celebrities who have already made their money. But rest assured, if they make too much of a bark and it starts hurting corporate America will move in and find some dirt on that barking dog. Okay, the third measure, though, was to create false avenues of protest so that people would be channeling their money into The third measure was to create false avenues of protest so that people would be channeling their energy into less important issues. Now, this is easy to do when you control the media. When you control the media, you control the minds of men. And it's fair to say that in America today, the wealthy elite control the minds of the poor and the middle class. It's not hard to do. And so, if you want to stop a raging river, such as an anti-war protest, especially if it gets out of hand, you create ways to divert that energy. You create spillways. Thus, less important issues such as the propriety of Civil War general statues, cultural appropriation, immigration, transgender bathroom rights are pushed to the forefront. It's not surprising that there was very little protest against the war in Iraq. It's not surprising that there's very little protest against the war with Iran today. And this is because the population of the United States has been largely pacified and diverted off into secondary issues. The whole point of this diversion is to keep America's focus off the enormous amount of money that is being spent on building bombs, jets, and military hardware that will ultimately have no lasting value, except perhaps the subjugation of developing nations for a few decades, after which the oppressed people of those nations will gradually rise up and get payback on the United States. This is the world we live in. This is the new world order. Now let's read some data off the internet. Media consolidation between 1980 and 2026 transformed a diverse landscape of tens of independent corporate players into an oligopoly controlled by a handful of massive conglomerates and tech billionaire owners. The 1980s baseline. In 1983, media critic Ben Bagjikian famously calculated that roughly 50 independent corporations controlled the vast majority of all American mass media, including news, publishing, and television. The present oligopoly. By 2026, market share has narrowed to roughly 5 or 6 core dominant entities, such as Comcast, the Walt Disney Company, Warner Brothers Discovery, Sony, and Amazon, along with tech platform giants controlling nearly 90% of mainstream output. Now, in order to control the perception that only a handful of corporations control the thought and conversation in America, the big corporations set up pseudo-independent avant-garde media sites, which gave the illusion that there was real choice in America. These sites had exciting names like BuzzFeed, Politico, and the Daily Beast, Vox. Yet these publications were also compliant lackeys of corporate America's state-owned media. The impact of consolidation on local news and print. The death of local papers. Since the early 2000s, thousands of traditional local newspapers have folded, creating vast information deserts. Surviving papers were largely absorbed by corporate chains or private equity firms. Local TV homogeneity. Local television news stations, once independently owned, fell heavily into the hands of mega corporations, with a small number of entities controlling a massive slice of local broadcast nationwide, reducing independent editorial staffing and regional voice. Many newspapers around the country had newsmen who were dedicated to either a foreign bureau or investigative reporting. For the most part, this went away. Now, this was great for corporate America, as there were fewer journalists to control. There were also fewer nosy journalists who might report adversely against what corporate America was selling or doing. Muckraking was essentially dead until YouTube and the internet came along. But soon corporate America knew how to control those independent nosy bloggers and YouTubers who were asking too many uncomfortable questions and getting too big an audience. Now, they did this by deplatforming people who asked the wrong questions or who spoke unapproved thoughts. Or Google, a quasi-government organization, an important member of the mainstream media, would set up an algorithm so that people might have a hard time finding a muckraker's contrarian channel. The effect of Clear Channel on radio. The rapid expansion of Clear Channel Communications, which is now iHeartMedia, following the Telecommunications Act of 1996, caused a massive reduction in the number of independent radio owners, forcing homogenization, reduced local content, and diminished competition. By 2002, the company owned over 1,200 stations, creating super duopolies that allowed it to control multiple stations within single markets, leaving little room for independent players to compete. Homogenization and reduced playlists. Independent stations faced immense pressure to adopt formulaic, centrally managed programming and playlists, resulting in less diverse nationalized content rather than local independent curation. Loss of local autonomy. Independent radio lost its local character as Clear Channel replaced local staff with regional or national voice track talent. Reduced market access for independent artists. Independent artists were shut out of the airwaves that favored corporately owned artists or required high-priced, specialized indie promoters. Anti-competitive practices. The company often paired radio ownership with concert promotion, creating an environment where it was difficult for independent venues and artists to get radio airplay. Disappearance of local news. Local news reporting was severely cut, with some stations failing to report on local emergencies because they were being operated from distant central sites. When you diminish the impact of local artists, your job of controlling America is easier. Furthermore, by cutting off grassroots avenues, you, corporate America, get to control who gets wealthy and who does not. And that makes you even more powerful.